Hi, folks. This is Jennifer Bremer with the Fair Districts team for the Fall Initiative for Fair Maps webinar to let you guys know not only what's going on, but how you can get involved as we continue to work to get reform in time for the 2021 redistricting. So what we're going to talk about today is where we are, as I mentioned, and where do we need to get, and then, of course, how do we get there? So covering where are we in the map drawing, what do the maps actually look like that have been produced by the most recent partial redrawing in the General Assembly. And the bottom line is that we need reform and not one-time fixes. What is our reform strategy then to get that, and how do we organize for success? To begin with, what I'm sure is on the top of everyone's mind, which is what happened in the current map drawing and where are we now? Well, they completed the map drawing on time. It was very interesting to observe it. A number of members of the League and our other partner organizations, NAACP, for example, were in the legislature a lot of the time and participated in the public comments. But of course, the main action was the legislature. The process was more transparent than it has been before, so we have to give them credit for that. Although, of course, this does not set a very high bar, since in the past it was completely invisible. What was actually going on was completely invisible, and everything that was shown was pretty much for show. The court-appointed master will now assess the maps. He has two jobs potentially. The first is to assess the maps, and the second then is to advise the court on whether the maps comply with the order and to redraw them if the court orders him to do that. This decision could be appealed, but I don't think it will be. I could be wrong, but whichever way it goes, one side could appeal it. But if they are ordered to redraw, or not ordered to redraw, conversely. But I don't think that the Republicans in particular would appeal. So what do the maps look like? Well, the bottom line is that it is still quite gerrymandered. There are different ways, of course, to measure a gerrymander, and the group of people out there in the internet who I call the map tribe have been very busy analyzing the different maps and giving us an idea of what they look like using different measures for redistricting and gerrymandering. The bottom line really is that this is what is called a sweetheart gerrymander. In other words, it really emphasizes safe seats for both sides, and it does, however, it's still about half as much or 2/3 as much, according to some measures, as gerrymandered as the current map. So you can see on the right there an example for the House as to how the districts kind of stack up. And you see a lot of seats that are very safe for the Republicans, some seats that are very safe for the Democrats, and far fewer of the sort of purple or magenta type colors that indicate that they're potentially more in the middle category. The VRA issues still need to be addressed. They have a few more days as I'm speaking. They have until almost the end of the month, I think, to provide a take on that. And we'll see that, or that's actually, I'm sorry, they may have filed that now. They have until the end of the month for the special master to say something. The analysts say that the map, as I mentioned, still favors Republicans. For example, Michael Bitzer here in the state estimates that only 49 out of 120 seats favor the Dems in the House, remembering, of course, that the statewide vote has been very split in recent years, pretty much 50-50, and in fact has, in some cases, favored the Dems, including more recently. And on the Senate side, equally, 22 out of 50 favor the Dems. So in both cases, of course, the Republicans would have a majority, but they would not have a supermajority. The Dems would have great difficulty getting a majority using these maps. They would need to outperform how Trump and Hillary Clinton performed in the 2016 election by as much as 10 to 12 points in the middle of the distribution, which means it is still pretty heavily skewed. Of course, the state itself is probably somewhat skewed just by geography. So you can see some more measures down here at the bottom. The efficiency gap, which measures wasted votes. In other words, when you pack people together, a lot of their votes are wasted because you don't need as many, say, Democratic votes in an urban area or Republican votes in a rural area. You don't need as many of those votes to win as you actually have. So those extra votes tend to be wasted. And also votes are wasted by people being put into districts where their party can never win. So whether they vote or not, doesn't really make any difference. And the voters have noticed that. So this shows that the efficiency gap is a 4.7, which is over to the right a little bit, but not necessarily above the cutoff that would usually be set. They were proposing a cutoff of 7% for the efficiency gap. The partisan bias, as I mentioned, which shows what if you look at if the election were 50-50, how far off would the distribution of seats be from that 50-50 split? And here, this plan is 3.2%, which again is less than the plan currently in place. And the mean median difference, another one, looks at what the median seat, again that middle seat in the distribution, what that would look like compared to the vote share, the mean of all votes, or the vote share that went to one party or the other. And as in the other measures, this plan is about 3.4% off to the right there, meaning they would get 3.4% more seats than they would be expected to get. So these are all kind of coming out in more or less the same place, that the plans are less biased, but by no means unbiased. And as I say, the process was more transparent, but it was still flawed in a number of ways. And I would also maybe mention a little bit about that. They showed them, for example, drawing maps, but for people at home and even for people in the room, it was very difficult to see what was really going on. You could see the map, but you couldn't always even see the whole county. You couldn't really always tell who was at the computer. The sound was behaving itself sometimes and not behaving itself other times. And in addition, there were large groups of people standing around discussing the maps who were completely off mic. I mean, sometimes there would be as many as 10 people clustered in a corner talking to each other. I don't think they were discussing sports, but we have no idea what they were discussing. So that was not as completely transparent as what the judges, I think, had in mind. So what would a real fix look like? Well, no surprise. We would like to see a commission created, ideally an independent commission, which would both draw the maps and vote on them, but at least an advisory commission where the legislature might still have a say, but would have a very limited ability to change what the commission had done. Anything like that would require legislation. And there are several good bills stuck in committee at the present time. Some of them there are some flaws in them, but we'd like to see changed. But in any case, until they're actually taken up by the committee, nothing's going to happen. A constitutional amendment would be required if we were going to remove the legislative vote to approve the maps. It would not be required per se for a commission because the legislature, since it controls the process, could decide that a commission should draw the maps for the legislature's vote. That they could do if they wanted to without a constitutional amendment. But anything that would remove their power to vote would have to be a constitutional amendment, which in our system means it has to pass the legislature. So the North Carolina Supreme Court could also mandate changes in the process if required to comply with the North Carolina Constitution. This is something I knew they could do this because they did that with regard to the county groupings, which the ones that, not the specific ones that they're redrawing, but in general, the process that says that in order to comply with one person, one vote while trying to keep counties whole, that they have to group the counties together and then redraw only within those groupings. That's not in the Constitution. The whole county provisions in the Constitution. And Justice Stevenson and the Stevenson Court several years ago created the county grouping method as a way to sort of bridge between those two not necessarily consistent requirements. So that means that the Supreme Court can change the process, and we are following that change to this day. So they do have the possibility of actually saying that, well, in order to comply with the Constitution, this other part of the Constitution has to be they can't modify the Constitution, but interpreting that, we have to do this or that. So they could actually require a commission. I don't know how likely that is to happen. And of course, the case would have to come before them, which, as I say, is possibly a reason that the Republicans would not want to give them a chance of doing that. So our reform strategy, just to remind folks what we're trying to do here, is to move the legislature by moving their voters. Now, legislators, and this will not come as a surprise, listen only to the people who vote for them. and specifically to the people who voted for them. In other words, not just people in their district, but people who they expect to vote for them. And we find, however, that conservative voters, in the case of the Republican legislators or otherwise, are very open to reform. On the right, you can see two polls. These are both fairly recent polls in the past couple of years. And they asked them, this one, the top question, asked them, asked a selection of voters, what do how serious do you think the problem of gerrymandering is in North Carolina? And overall, I mean, almost 80%, 79% said that this was a serious problem, with more than a third, 37%, saying that it was very serious. Of course, these percentages were higher for the Democrats and lower for the GOP. But still, you've got 70% of the GOP voters saying that this is a serious problem, and 75% of independents. And in many counties, or many districts rather, a member of one party or the other cannot win without getting some of the independent votes. So they're a very important group for us to reach out to. But ideally, the more conservative ones among them, since we are trying to influence the majority party because they're the ones that control the votes. And these voters then must be mobilized to support reform actively by continuing to show them why this is a serious problem and what can be done about it, and also by talking about what they themselves can do ideally. So the other question there, again, is sort of similar, shows that it asks if they supported changing the law to ensure nonpartisan drawing of the districts, just asking support or oppose. And more than half of the voters, well over half, 57%, supported such a change. And Democrats supported it more, Republicans less, but independents in this poll actually supported it even more than Democrats. So you're looking at almost 2/3 of them saying that they supported a nonpartisan method of drawing the districts. And that may be because many of the independents actually, some of them are just strategically independent. They're Democrats, but they're in a Republican county or vice versa, and they want to vote in the primary. But others just don't really like the parties. So the idea of something nonpartisan may be especially appealing to independents. So how do we actually move these people to not only be in favor of reform, but actually to be actively pushing for it? Well, this takes multiple touches in general to move someone from knowing that there's an issue to having an opinion on it and then wanting to act on it. And those touches ideally use a mix of methods, touching them in person by talking to them, phoning them, etc., sending them a postcard, through the media, kinds of different ways to get to them through the media, and through mobilizing local leadership that has an influence over people in their locality, whether that's town council, county commission, former officials, former elected officials, etc. So that's what we're trying to do, is to use all three of these methods. And to get that done, we've targeted 32 priority counties altogether. And each of these counties has at least one and sometimes multiple seats on the rules and or redistricting committees or in the General Assembly leadership. And some of these are lead counties, but many of these are non-lead counties. And this is only to be expected given that the conservative members and the on these, and particularly the leadership in these committees and overall are they come from the Republican Party, which is strongest in the rural areas. So some of these are league counties, but most of them are non-league counties. And that's just the way it is. It's because the league is also strongest in the cities, but we do have a presence in a number of more rural counties, as well as some individual members out there in rural counties. Overall, we have at least one member, I forget where I cut it off, two or three, in something like 75 counties. So we have a good spread across the state. And we also have our statewide partners and local organizations that cover the state more completely. So what we're really asking is if you can help us get the message out to these voters. We held last spring 17 community forums, and we're planning 21 for this fall. We've shifted them around a little bit. We're going back to some of the places that we've been before and talked to more voters. We have found that if we go back a second time, working with local people that we met the first time, we can get much larger groups to show up. And recognizing that many of these are pretty small communities, we have also shifted to add in some of the lower priority counties that have at the same time larger cities. So places like Cabarrus County, for example, which we is not in our priority one, just given their representatives in the legislature, who's on rules and redistricting in the House or Senate. But it is a city that has a county that has several very large cities, some of which have been hit by gerrymandering in particular, such as Concord. So we think that they may be, a better place to try to bring together a crowd. Also, there are a lot of events. This is the fall has finally arrived, and we have a lot of festivals out there, which are great. You can go and enjoy the festival and see, maybe see a different part of the state. We have, of course, as within that, we have the state fair and the very large Dixie Fair, which is in Winston-Salem. There are also elections, which means that people will be standing in line waiting to vote, especially on the weekends. And we have our Speakers Bureau, which can send people to speak to events that are being held by other organizations, typically meetings that we would speak at. We also want to reach voters. You can reach voters right from your own home. We reach into their homes with postcards, with texting, and so forth, and we can help you do that. We have postcards. They're pre-messaged. They need to be just add the address, and usually we use pre-printed labels for that, and then sign it and send it off. So finally, the media, billboards and radio ads and letters to the editor. And of those, of course, where you could get involved is in letters to the editor. And we have a letters to the editor toolkit, which we'd be happy to share if somebody wants to work on that. Or different people want to work on that in their area and reach out to some of the newspapers. And we have a media list as well, which tells you what newspapers are in those different counties. And we're not in this alone, of course. Fair Districts NC is an organization that was started by the League, but is by no means are we the only member. There's also the North Carolina Council of Churches, the NAACP at the state level, and several local chapters, Church Women United, the Libertarian Party, and Rational Republicans, which is a smaller group out in the West. And we also are working very closely with a number of partners through Blueprint, which is a coalition organization that we belong to. And some of the partners there that we have worked with and are continuing to work with, Common Cause, Democracy NC, You Can Vote, Friends of the Earth, Progress NC, and the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. So altogether, I mean, we're working with some very powerful partners that have good reach across the state. And so there's definitely, this is an important part of our strategy to partner with them. And we have materials and funds and other support in place. We have received 2 grants. One was completed last December. We have a second grant, a larger grant from the League of Women Voters. So they have provided in the second grant about $15,000 to fund things like stamps and printing and being able to reimburse people if you take a trip that's longer than 100 miles round trip that can cover gas and that kind of thing. And in addition, very exciting, the League of Women Voters of the U.S. has launched a $1 million initiative, and they have dedicated $500,000 from their own funds, and they're raising more funds, and they will be making grants to the states that have signed up to participate, as we have, of course. They're hoping to get all 50 states to participate. I'm not sure whether they got all 50, and of course, every state's in a different position. Some of them already have reform and need to look at how to implement it. Some of them are, have court battles that the league is involved in. Others may have referenda on upcoming ballots, etc. So, so they will be making grants from this $1 million over the next couple of years. But more importantly, I want to really emphasize, to me, our democracy is at risk from gerrymandering. It's not just a question that of this being something that we want to see to get, fair elections, which of course are really important, but because fundamentally the unfairness of the maps, it discourages voters, it leads to greater polarization, and it's really putting our democracy at risk. But we need your help to win our fight for fair maps and strengthen our democracy. The calendar is moving. We had, of course, the North Carolina court ruling, which I've been discussing. We're now currently in the extra long session, which will presumably end sometime when they finish the budget, or may continue until the end of the year or beyond. No one is certain. And there could be legislation in this session. Still, there are 5 bills in the House and several bills in the Senate. And then once we cross into 2020, there will be a new map, presumably, at this point, and there will be a primary where in principle, a constitutional amendment could be passed in the statewide election, and the census will also take place during this period, particularly in March and April, spreading into a little bit into the summer if people don't fill out the form. And then in May to July period, there will be the legislature will be back. There'll be still the same legislature for their short session, and there could be a delayed primary in the event that the court moves the primary, which they have the ability to do if they cannot complete the redrawing process in time. Then in August to December, there will of course be, a general election. You may have heard of the 2020 election. There could also be a special session, typically after the election, as we've seen in the past. And again, the general election is the second opportunity to pass a reform. Then in January to July 21, more or less, there will be a long session with the newly elected legislature, and the redistricting process should take place during that time period, beginning when the data is distributed by the census, which is about February sometime, could be March, who knows. And then in December 21, there will be the filing for the first election with the new maps that have been drawn with the new census data. And then again, obviously in 2022, the first elections with the new map. So, so these are, really, really important. We have these two remaining chances to get a constitutional amendment passed. A regular legislation could be passed anytime up to the point where they actually do the redrawing. So our core team has been at work for over a year, and we've come a long way, but there's still a very long ways to go, and your help can make a big difference to this. So the purpose of this and telling you what we're going to be doing and why it's so important and where we are in the process is really to ask whether you can become a team member or even a leader of one of our teams, such as letters to the editor or postcarding or what have you. As I mentioned, we had 34 volunteers participating in the spring set of community forums. That was from the league alone. In addition, our partners provided speakers and logistic assistance in multiple locations across the state. And our partners, whom I mentioned, will be continuing to support us, the Council of Churches, NAACP, Church Women United, the Libertarians, and we're working to broaden the coalition. And what we're looking for, we also have materials, postcards, and scripts and whatever you would need in place. And we're looking to be a leader. We're looking ideally for about 2 hours a week. For ordinary volunteers, it's just whatever you have available by way of time, but the more the better. We have things you can do from home. We have things that enable you to maybe go to the state fair. We're looking at a delegation to the state fair to go and talk to voters standing in line and get them to sign to endorse our 5 principles for an independent redistricting commission. We have all kinds of materials, but we really need people to help us get the word out and reach those voters that I was talking about, conservative voters who actually we have found, if you talk to them about the values and our American democracy and how important that is and the role of the voter, they are very responsive. Even people who are quite conservative will respond. Very rarely, hardly ever do we have a hostile conversation. And the people are really very interested, and we've been found that we have to get to them and bring these ideas to them. So these are the 5 teams that we're looking at, forums that I mentioned, our community forums where we go out and talk to people. And we need not only their speakers, we actually probably have enough speakers to do our previous speaker training. What we really need is help in organizing them, finding venues, doing the promotion, posting on Facebook, reaching out to local partners by phone or whatever. So that's really the main need for the forums. Then the Meet the Voters activities such as postcarding and going to fairs and that kind of thing. The Speakers Bureau, placing our speakers in Rotary meetings or whatever, the newcomers groups or speaking to the mini groups in CCRCs, continuing care retirement communities around the state, which are great. You can get an audience of 60 people in a CCRC easily, and other kinds of opportunities to speak. Postcarding, as I mentioned, and letters to the editor. So those are the teams that we have, and we're looking for ideally 5 or more people. If you want to co-lead, that's good too. who could commit to 2 hours a week through about mid-December. Nothing's going to happen after mid-December until we get into the new year. So that's what we're looking for, is a commitment to join our fall initiative. So thank you very much, and I hope that we will be hearing from you. And you can reach us, you can reach me at bremer.jennifer@gmail.com. That's just my name backwards, so Bremer, B-R-E-M-E-R .Jennifer @gmail.com. You can reach us through our website, where we have both the fairdistrictsnc.org, all one word, where we can, you can get endorsement forms, you can endorse yourself, you can fill out our volunteer form. There are lots of ways that you can reach us. And we hope that you will, because, as I say, this is just super important. And I know that all of you are as committed to our democracy as I am. And I hope that you will step forward and help us ensure that we strengthen our democracy and keep it in place for the coming generations. So thank you very much. So here's that information again on how you can join our fall initiative. And we hope that you'll be ready to help us, in particular by leading one of our sub-teams, at least through, for the next 2.5 months or so. You can send me an email, as I mentioned. You can also call to discuss. That's my phone number. And if you go to our website, which again is fairdistrictsnc.org, you can fill in our volunteer form, download copies of the 5 principles, endorse the 5 principles yourself, and we're going to be adding actually a form to request materials. But for the time being, you can, if you need brochures or buttons or postcards, etc., you can email us at admin@fairdistrictsnc.org. So that's just about all that I have. So thanks very much, and be happy to answer any questions that you have. If you want to email me, I'd be happy to respond to questions, or call me for that matter. Thanks very much.